There is a man in his garage right now. It is Saturday morning. The lawnmower stopped working 3 weeks ago, and a new one costs $60 at the hardware store. He has spent 4 Saturdays taking this one apart. His knuckles are scraped. There is grease under his fingernails that will not fully wash out. His wife suggested twice, quietly, that they just buy the new one. He heard her. He is not replacing the lawnmower. This is not stubbornness. Not exactly. Something else is operating underneath it. Something older, quieter, and far more psychologically interesting than simple resistance to change. To understand people who fix rather than replace, you have to go back further than the individual. You have to go back to the world they were born into, or the world their parents were born into and never fully left. The generation that first hardwired this behavior lived through the Great Depression and then immediately through a world war. These were not abstract historical events. They were the texture of daily life. Bread lines, ration books, shoes resold 4 times before they were discarded. Children who grew up in that era learned something that went far deeper than thrift. They learned that objects were not casual, that resources could disappear, that the correct response to a broken thing was not to discard it, but to understand it well enough to bring it back. That lesson did not stay in the 1930s. It was passed down through kitchens, through garages, through the particular way a father handed a son a wrench without saying much. The children of those Depression-era parents grew up in the post-war boom. There was suddenly abundance. New cars, new appliances, the first televisions arriving in living rooms in heavy wooden cabinets. But the emotional programming from the previous decade did not simply update itself. The behavior persisted inside the new prosperity like a dialect that never quite disappeared. What psychology calls this is the endowment effect. Once something belongs to you, truly belongs to you, with time and effort and memory attached, it becomes worth more to you than its market price. A repaired lamp is not the same as a new lamp. The repaired one has a history. The new one is just an object. But here is what most people misunderstand about this. They assume the person doing the repairing is primarily motivated by saving money. Sometimes that is a factor. But watch closely and you will see something else. The act of repair is not really about the object. It is about the person doing the repairing. It is about competence, agency, the experience of understanding how something works and having the power to restore it. Think about what the post-war suburban landscape looked like in the late 1950s. Identical houses, long commutes beginning, work becoming more abstract, more office, more paperwork, more tasks whose outcomes were hard to measure. A man who spent 8 hours in a fluorescent-lit building moving numbers from one column to another could come home and spend 90 minutes replacing a section of copper pipe, and at the end of those 90 minutes, he had done something visible, something real. The water ran again. He had fixed it.
That psychological transaction is enormously powerful. It is one of the most direct routes to what researchers now call self-efficacy, the felt sense that your actions produce real outcomes in the world. When that sense is depleted, people seek it. Repair is one of the oldest ways to restore it. This is also why the behavior tends to intensify under stress. The person under financial pressure or professional uncertainty or personal loss, they often become the most determined repairers. They cannot control their job situation. They cannot control the economy, but they can strip this carburetor down to its components and rebuild it. And so they do, for hours on a Saturday morning in a garage while a new lawnmower sits $60 away on a shelf. There's a further layer that almost never gets discussed. The act of repairing something rather than replacing it is also at a deep level a form of loyalty. It is a statement about what things mean. People who fix rather than replace are often operating inside a worldview where abandonment of objects, of relationships, of commitments carries a moral weight that others do not feel as strongly. Watch how these same people behave in relationships. They are often the ones who stay, who try harder, who return to a difficult conversation 3, 4, 5 times, not because they lack the ability to walk away, but because their internal architecture frames walking away as the option of last resort. They apply the same logic.
The thing is broken. The correct response is to understand why and to fix it. This can be a profound strength. It can also be a trap, because not everything broken should be repaired. Some systems are not worth salvaging. Some relationships are genuinely past restoration. Some lawnmowers should just be replaced. But people with this psychology often cannot reach that conclusion until they have exhausted every alternative, sometimes long past the point when others would have let go. The cultural forces that created this did not disappear with the post-war generation. They diluted, shifted, and re-expressed in new forms. Millennials who grew up watching their parents lose homes in 2008 developed their own version of the fix not replace psychology, expressed not in carpentry but in refurbished furniture, mended clothing, replanted houseplants, repaired electronics. The specific objects changed, the underlying emotional logic did not. And here is something important. The consumer culture that arose through the 1960s and accelerated through the 1980s was, in many ways, built in direct opposition to this psychology. Planned obsolescence, the deliberate design of products to fail and require replacement, was an economic strategy, not a natural law. The advertising of that era specifically worked to reframe repair as embarrassing. Old things were associated with poverty, with failure to keep up. New things were aspirational. The implicit message was that holding on to the broken version of something was a sign that you could not afford better. Some people absorbed that message entirely. Others rejected it, consciously or not, and kept going out to their garages on Saturday mornings. The tension between those two responses is still active, right now, today, in hardware stores and repair cafes and YouTube tutorials watched by people who are convinced they can fix the thing before buying a replacement. The modern repair movement, the right to repair legislation, the resurgence of craft skills, is not simply an environmental trend. It is a psychological revolt against the 40-year argument that replacement is progress. What drives the person who would rather fix than replace is not backwardness. It is not an inability to let go or an irrational attachment to things. At its core, it is a specific relationship with meaning, a belief, deep and mostly unconscious, that the history inside an object, the hours, the repairs, the memory of where it came from, is not something that can be purchased at a store. That belief was forged in hardship and passed down through generations of people who learned that resources were finite, that effort was honorable, and that the capacity to restore something broken was one of the most reliable forms of human dignity available. The man in the garage with the lawnmower is not refusing to buy a new one. He is refusing to believe that what he has is not worth saving. The question worth sitting with is not whether that belief is practical. The question is what it would mean for each of us to examine where we apply it and where we do not. Because the things people choose to fix and the things they choose to replace tell you almost everything about what they have been taught to believe is worth keeping.